I'm Debbie Chu, and this is SEO in 2024.
Debbie, what's your number one SEO tip for 2024?
For 2024, I think it's really important to stay on top of your link and mention building.
Link and mention building. So I love your addition of the word mention, because that doesn't necessarily all the time go hand in hand with link building. Can you really measure the value of mentions?
I think it is possible. Like if you look at, for example, there's like this one link building tactic, which is unlinked mentions and turning those into links. I think it's more of just the idea of really getting your brand out there, getting people to talk about your brand. Of course, if we get the link, that's like a huge win, but there are going to be instances or publications that just don't link out. And so getting that mention might still be valuable. So for example, like at Dialpad, we really like to do research reports. And sometimes there are going to be news publications that mention the news report, but they don't actually link to Dialpad. They do talk about like, oh, Dialpad's study of blah, blah, blah. And the big benefit of that is, number one, you're getting mentioned on a really big name publication. You're getting your name out there, you're getting the word out there about the report that you did. But then also, that also means that people who might be writing content related to your report might find out about that link or about that report through this news publication, and then they might be the ones who eventually link to you. So it's not just about getting a link, but just building out the word about the really great content that you push out.
And I guess this goes hand in hand with other advice about building the presence of your entity, ensuring that search engines understand what your brand is, what it represents. And obviously you can do that with on-site content, off-site content, schema as well. But off-site mentions would enhance that. Is that something you'd certainly agree with, I presume?
Yes, definitely agree with that. In the past, like Google has mentioned that EAT is largely based on both links and mentions. And so another thing that they recently said was how links are no longer the top 3 ranking factors. They mentioned this at PubCon. And I think it's been something like a message that they've been trying to say more and more recently. And I think it's because sometimes people are too focused on building links in high quality, where like the high quantity, so then the quality kind of gets cut down. So people are maybe more focused on building spammy links or links that are maybe not so great for the website. And that just causes a lot of potential problems for Google because they have to crawl all of these links, but then they're not actually good links. They're not really helpful links. And so I think we need to kind of look back and figure out like, okay, links is just one part of the equation. I think links, they're not saying that links are not important. Links still have a really important place when it comes to ranking, but there's just so many different signals that Google uses to determine, what is actually going to rank for a certain query. And so we need to kind of try not to overestimate the impact of links and really understand like where does a link fit into the whole like SEO strategy.
So would you say that once Google or whatever search engine is comfortable with what your brand is, what you represent, and mentions of your brand, what that means, that a brand mention is just as effective as a link?
I would say maybe not equally effective. I think it's good to try to seek out those mentions. So number one is try to get those mentions. And then number two is try to seek out those mentions, try to turn those mentions into links. And that's when you can really benefit the most from those mentions.
So we're talking a lot about AI. We're talking a lot about generative AI in this year's publication. How is the process of building links influenced by the likelihood of the user receiving an AI-generated result? Is link building done in the same way in order to achieve that different style of result?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good call out. Like this year, the whole industry has kind of been shaken up due to AI and what generative AI has brought to the table. I think with generative AI, like using generative AI is really great for like more long tail queries or things are that aren't so factual, like things that are a bit maybe more creative. And there's still a place for search, like Google search or other search engines where people are trying to find things that are a bit more factual. But going back to the question, I think with the sort of rise of generative AI, it really makes link building and mention building even more important, I would say, than before. Because generative AI, the whole idea behind it is that it's learning from a bunch of existing text and is trying to predict whatever is the next word in regards to whatever question you're asking it, right? And so, like, let's say I am writing a blog post about the top VoIP providers, and maybe like generative AI is really good to kind of help me do some research. So, like, I can ask it, like, hey, send me what are the top like 50 VoIP providers, and it'll give me a list, and then I can go through that list one by one and actually check, and decide who is actually going to make it onto my final blog post. And so in those situations, it's really important to be able to sort of influence generative AI so that it knows that, for example, if I am an SEO at a company that provides VoIP services, I want to make sure that generative AI knows that I sort of exist and that the next time someone asks about VoIP providers, it should ideally mention me as a potential candidate, right? Like I really want to make sure that I'm on that short list. So in order to do that, it's all about, again, going and figuring out like how do we get our brand out there? How do we get our brand mentioned more? And one really like concrete way to do that is to do more like listicle outreach. So especially within like SaaS, people like to do like the top X software listicle or to the top X software for like small businesses, for example. Getting onto those types of lists, especially when they're really relevant to your product or the features that you have, is really important. So number one, just going into the SERPs and figuring out like which of these lists makes sense to be included on. You can also look at your competitors, like what are lists that your competitors are listed on, but you aren't listed on. Those are just really great opportunities for you to try to reach out to whoever wrote those blog posts and see if they can include your product onto those listicles. So this idea of building mentions and links is really related to potentially influencing generative AI.
Okay, understood. So I certainly understand from what you were saying earlier on that generative AI likes listicle type posts because then it gets a sense of the top players in a particular sector. But in terms of doing the outreach and reaching out to the blog author, is it as simple as saying, really appreciated your post, I like this about it, oh, by the way, I am also from this company and we do this as well, so if you do choose to update it in the future, I'd appreciate if you choose us. Is that the kind of outreach, or is there a better way of doing it?
I would say that's like a sort of maybe basic version of doing an outreach. I think a lot of outreach templates tend to kind of follow that template. I think one thing to really try to do is to personalize whenever you can. I think like what you mentioned, like, oh, maybe calling something out, maybe try to call something very specific about their post that doesn't necessarily exist in other posts, because you want to show that you really did take the time to review their content. It's not just an email template that you're sending out to a bunch of different people. I think another way to kind of step it up is if you can try to build some sort of relation with this person. So if you want a favor from them, like how can you kind of give that, or how can you do a favor for them? So perhaps, let's say if you have a very large social media presence, then you could potentially let them know, like, you'd be happy to share this on your social media with 1 million followers or something like that. And that makes it really valuable to the person who is getting your email outreach. So just trying to figure out, like, is there any way for you to negotiate something so that it's not just them helping you, but you're also helping them.
And you also say that you shouldn't blindly build links to pages without regularly revisiting the SERPs. So why is that, and what do you mean by that?
Yeah, so I think with link building, sometimes for the people who know that it is important, we might continuously build links to a certain page. Like maybe there's this money keyword that we really want to rank for, and like every month we're building links to it, and then maybe the position or the ranking of that page kind of starts to stagnate. In those situations, I think it's really important to take a look at the SERPs, not just continuously pour resources into building links to that page, because links might not be the reason why it's not ranking the ranking has not improved. So for example, like potentially if you look at the SERPs, maybe you'll realize that the user, like what people are looking for, the intent of that query might have changed. And so in those situations, you need to go back to your content and see, like, how do we adjust the content to better match what people are now looking for example. Or maybe in the SERPs, you are one of the slowest pages, and maybe that's the reason why you're kind of being held back, and you want to make sure, is there anything that you can do on the technical SEO side to help improve the page speed, for example, of that page. So there are a lot of different potential factors for why your page might not be ranking number one. It's not always links, but links can be a factor. There's also like maybe the quantity versus quality question. So maybe your competitor only has like 5 really good links, and you've built like 20 links that aren't as good, and that might be a reason why. So instead of focusing on the quantity, maybe you want to focus on getting more quality links, and that'll really help boost your page.
Great advice. Any other link building tactics that you'd like to recommend to focus on in 2024?
I think going back to the basics, like creating linkable assets is still going to be really important. Things like guides, glossary pages, stats pages. I think it's really important to also figure out like what types of link building or linkable assets are the most effective for your industry. So think about like your competitors, what's actually working well for them, like what are their best pages by links, and then figure out, okay, is that the direction that we want to go in, and try out and to see whether or not that works for us. Because sometimes what works for them might not work for you. And then maybe also in those cases, maybe try to also look at industries that are a bit similar to yours and see what they're doing, and then try to figure out what is that best tactic or what is that best linkable asset that you can create that you can really benefit from.
Great idea. So don't just follow what your direct competitors are doing. Similar industries might be more progressive in terms of what they're doing from a digital marketing perspective. So learn off them.
Yeah, exactly.
If an SEO is struggling for time, what should they stop doing right now so they can spend more time doing what you suggest in 2024?
I think with kind of all the changes that are going around within the SEO industry, definitely going back to sort of the basics and like what are the key areas of SEO, like the 3 main pillars: content, links, and technical SEO. Whenever there's some sort of issue on the technical SEO end, like maybe you do an audit and there's like a bunch of different errors that pop up, like don't freak out and kind of just calm down and look at, okay, what is the biggest, most impactful thing that we can work on that will really move the needle. Don't focus too much on like the little things. Like if there's like a bunch of small errors that maybe we fix those errors, but then it's not going to really give us results, not really going to help our organic rankings. Like, don't worry too much about those. Really focus on the big things and go back to the basics.
Debbie Chu is a global SEO manager, and you can find her over at debbieychu.com. Debbie, thanks so much for being part of SEO in 2024.
Yeah, thank you for having me again.
I've been your host, David Bain. Get your copy of SEO in 2024, the book, over at SEOin2024.com.